Good morning, everyone, and happy Tuesday. Feels a little weird, not saying happy webinar Wednesday, but we're mixing it up a little bit here at PRLA. Happy Tuesday. Nice to see you all. The PRLA team is excited to join you for another industry update webinar. Since we last met, the House has established legislative committee rosters. The governor has proposed his first budget. And millions of brackets were busted before we even had a chance to actually talk about March Madness, despite seeing two great runs by some awesome Pennsylvania teams in Penn State and the University of Pittsburgh. I'm joined today by my colleague, Lauren Brinjack, PRLA Senior Director of Legislative Affairs. It's been an exciting couple weeks. We hosted our second annual advocacy boot camp in State College last week. Thank you to the more than 30 members who were able to attend that to learn some tips and tricks on better communicating with your elected officials. And we also hosted a mayoral candidates forum in the city of Philadelphia last Tuesday, which I know some of you on this call attended in Philadelphia last week. And it was really a great opportunity to see our operators and the industry engage with those running to be Philadelphia's next leader in the mayor's office. So I want to dive right into things and kick things off with a state of the legislature update. In terms of session, the House and Senate are technically both in session, recess right now, not in session. That said, it doesn't mean that they're not at the Capitol because budget hearings have officially started this week. We'll certainly keep a close eye on those conversations as news begins to develop. Governor Shapiro did propose his first budget earlier this month. No budget proposal is ever perfect. It's also worth noting that no budget proposal ever ends up being final. The devil is typically in the details, and the governor's proposal is normally seen as a starting point to that conversation. $44.3 billion spending plan proposed, 3.6% spending increase over the current fiscal year. He did, like in many budgets in the past under Governor Wolf's administration, emphasize his commitment to increasing the minimum wage here in Pennsylvania to $15 an hour. He did not address the tip credit. However, one thing that was noticeably different about Governor Shapiro's proposal versus proposals on the minimum wage that we've seen in the past, and we haven't actually seen the legislative text on this filed yet. However, he noted that he'd like to see that increase as soon as January 2024. So unlike other administrations who have kind of taken the tiered approach to that conversation, it looks like Governor Shapiro is using this as his starting point. But that's exactly what that is. It's a starting point for negotiations, what will likely be long negotiations with a Republican-controlled Pennsylvania Senate. Tourism funding, as it relates specifically to the tourism office, unfortunately does not receive an increase in the governor's proposal. There is $7 million that was authorized from the tourism promotion fund in the proposal versus what we've seen in the past, typically around the $5 million mark. Some of you may also be familiar with what was Act 54 of 2022 last year, which established the sports tourism and marketing account that would be used to attract high-quality sporting events and e-sporting events to the Commonwealth to promote tourism and economic development. For 2022-2023, that number would be proposed at either 5% of revenue generated from sports wagering or $2.5 million, whichever one of those numbers is greater. And then the deposit would not be able to exceed $5 million. So we were excited to kind of see that item surface again. Front and center, Governor Shapiro points out that his budget aims to address the workforce shortage that we're seeing here in Pennsylvania. Also an investment in PA businesses. We continue to hear from members at PRLA and operators all throughout the industry here in the Commonwealth about the labor crisis still being the number one concern. And so despite the fact that we did not see the increase in tourism that we were hoping to see, we were hopeful to at least see some bandwidth and conversation attributed to the workforce shortage. For instance, he proposes creating a new PA Schools to Work program by investing $3.5 million to support workforce development partnerships between schools and employers and associations and organizations that create and invest in creating robust employment and training pathways. The 2023-2024 budget proposal also provides an additional $12 million for the Pennsylvania First program. That is a program it's a versatile development tool within DCED that can provide flexible financial assistance for workforce training, for land and building costs, for machinery and equipment. The funds provided through this program typically have been leveraged as a significant private investment to maximize return in somewhat in the business community. Also proposes to invest $20 million in historically disadvantaged businesses that were affected by the pandemic. Lastly, I wanted to at least mention on the proposal that it expands the state's Keystone Communities program by investing $8.6 million in communities that are already on path to a revitalization and continue to facilitate greater participation for smaller, rural, lower income communities. Includes a $1 million investment for the Pennsylvania Council on the Arts to expand financial assistance opportunities, ultimately with the goal of driving retention and attraction to residents and talents. $2.8 million for state parks here in Pennsylvania. And then lastly, there's also a note in the proposal, still haven't seen the official details on this, but there was a suggestion of legalizing cannabis for adult use here in Pennsylvania. The revenue that the governor and his team are looking at would account for a 20% tax on the wholesale of that product. And they're starting to count that revenue in year 2025. So it was interesting to see that surface in conversations. But with that, we now hit that long road ahead of us of budget hearings, of budget conversations within the Appropriations Committee in both chambers, the Pennsylvania House and the Senate. They're not in session, but I want to turn it over to Lauren to get kind of tag along here on additional updates in the state of the legislation.
Yeah, thanks for the update, Zach. As Zach mentioned, can everyone hear me? Sorry. As Zach mentioned, the House and Senate have adjourned until end of April, so they are all tied up, the House and Senate appropriations hearings, with appropriations hearings for the next 6 weeks or so. Things got off to an interesting sort of a late start this year with the House because of the elections and some of what went on with the speaker elections. But earlier this month, the House did establish their rules. Speaker Representative Joanna McClinton, a Democrat from Philadelphia County, was elected Speaker of the House and the first female Speaker of the House. Shortly thereafter, full committee assignments were given. We now have the Democratic and Republican chairs of the House committees established. And while we had been waiting for that, there was not much, if any, really legislative action happening in the House. Some of those chairs, we have Jason Dawkins from Philadelphia County, who is the Democratic Majority Chair of the Labor and Industry Committee. We have Dan Deasy from Allegheny County, who is Chair of the House Liquor Control Committee. And Representative Deasy had served for many years as Minority Chair of that same committee. So he is no stranger to the alcohol liquor control issues in the State House. And then we have Representative Mary Jo Daley, who will be the Majority Chair of the House Tourism Committee. And she is also no stranger to that committee, as she had served for many years as Minority Chair of that committee. One interesting note, the name of the Tourism Committee has been updated for 2023. Instead of the Tourism and Recreational Development Committee, it will now be the House Tourism, Economic and Recreational Development Committee. And that was a change that Representative Daley recommended. She thought putting that economic piece into the name of the committee really was an important reflection of the role that tourism does play in Pennsylvania's economy. And so given PRLA's many priorities having to do with tourism, we were certainly very happy to see that change. And she did note that PRLA was somewhat of an inspiration in her recommending that name change of the committee. Right now, the House is still almost evenly split. The count is 101 Democrats to 100 Republicans. We have 2 open seats right now. Democratic Representative Mike Zabel resigned effective last week, and Republican Representative Linda Culver-Schlegel won an open Senate seat in February. So those 2 seats are open right now and will be filled in conjunction with the May 16th primary election. Those seats are expected to remain in the hands of the parties that they were in before. So we, post-election, we are forecasting that the House will remain in Democratic hands and probably have a 102 to 101 split, but still a very slim margin. And so we are really looking forward to, as we approach end of April and the House and Senate come back into session, with the House now being fully organized, we're interested to see what legislation starts moving forward and what of Governor Shapiro's priorities do the House Democrats take up, and how quickly do they move on those. We'll be moving very quickly into the heat of budget season in May and certainly in June. And that brings me to my next topic, which is PRLA's own Legislative Day, which is going to take place this year on May 2nd at the Capitol Complex in Harrisburg. And we are doing this in conjunction with our Leadership Forum, which is the previous day, May 1st. This is going to be a really great event. We're happy to be able to bring back Legislative Day after a few years of not having it. We think this is absolutely the right time to do it, with the House having House Democrats having taken control of the chamber for the first time in, I think, over 10 years. We've got a host of legislative issues now in play that may not have been in play before. And this is a great time to come to Harrisburg to talk to your legislator about the importance of the hospitality industry. Zach and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to do so. When you register for the event, we will begin making appointments for you with your elected officials. We will be putting groups together to go into legislators' offices in Harrisburg. We'll be attending some of those meetings with you as well. In the morning before we have folks go over to the Capitol, Zach and I will be doing a briefing for you at the Hilton, where we will kind of give you all of our talking points. We will explain PRLA's legislative priorities, the bills that are in play, and the message that we would like you to give to your legislator. We have earlier this year, and I think we've mentioned on past webinars, we had our policy committee meeting where we came up with and really fleshed out our legislative priorities for this year. And these are just some of the topics that you'll be talking with your legislators about in May, should you attend the event. And so just as a reminder, our Alcohol Service Committee priorities include things like increasing the licensee discount from 10 to 15%. You might remember this was a bill that was introduced last legislative session as well. Unfortunately, it only passed the House. It subsequently died in the Senate Appropriations Committee. We are reviving those efforts this year and are excited about a new opportunity to educate legislators on the importance of that legislation. In addition, we are advocating for legislation to extend the provisions allowed by Act 81 of 2021, most notably permanently lifting the unnecessary restrictions, that is that 52 event cap on off-premise catering. We are also engaged in discussions surrounding the legalization of adult use cannabis. As Zach mentioned, something that Governor Shapiro noted in his budget address earlier this month. We're engaged in conversations with legislators and many stakeholders who are involved in those conversations. And we're sure will continue to be a hot topic throughout this year. Some of the priorities established by our Government Affairs Committee include advocating to allow association health plans in Pennsylvania, which would allow small businesses to offer affordable and competitive health benefits. We know that Representative Valerie Gatos from Allegheny County will be reintroducing that legislation again this year, and she has been a real champion of that issue for the last several years. We're excited to see maybe a new opportunity to see that legislation advance this year. We're also engaged with both the Shapiro administration and the legislature on more business policy, more business friendly policy, and regulatory reform. And we know Governor Shapiro has taken a pretty, we would say, business friendly approach to governing thus far this year, and certainly seems open to hearing from the business community. So we are looking forward to engaging more fully with the governor and the legislature on those topics. And now I'm going to throw it back to Zach to touch on some of our lodging and tourism priorities.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. And before we move on to L&T, I did just want to share a link here because we didn't include this in the slides, but I wanted to at least acknowledge that last week, as it relates to government affairs, PRLA, along with some other partners, hosted the first ever forum for candidates running for Philadelphia mayor, specifically on hospitality and tourism related concerns. About the near dozen candidates that showed up had a lot to say, obviously, on the subjects most important to our industry. I just threw a link in the chat. The event was live streamed on 6abc.com and everywhere you stream 6ABC. They also archived the conversation, and you could find it in the link here that I included in the chat. And then I'm also going to copy another link here for those who weren't able to attend. And if you don't have the time to binge watch the link I just shared, this is a written candidate questionnaire that us and the other partners also produced. We got more than a majority of the candidates to respond to that written questionnaire. It's on the PRLA website. Again, asking them questions specifically about hospitality and tourism, getting them on the record as to where they stand on some of these issues, and would really encourage all of you to check that out if you're interested in Philadelphia politics. Now moving on to some lodging and tourism concerns. And before I jump into the regular programming here about our priorities, I did want to mention something, again, that's not in the slides as it relates to lodging and travel. You might have seen, this is kind of hot off the press here. There's been some recent conversation about rail projects and the infrastructure news here in Pennsylvania. As many of you know, we've been talking about it on every one of these webinars. Money is starting to be appropriated regarding the infrastructure spending plan that was passed at the federal level under President Biden administrations. You may recall that they've doubled the amount of infrastructure money, close to $2 billion plus, that they plan on spending here in Pennsylvania. Some of that money is starting to be appropriated. A lot of conversations happening in local regions and municipalities and boroughs regarding those projects. On Friday, for instance, SEPTA had announced in southeastern PA that it has stopped construction for the King of Prussia rail project due to the lack of federal funds to cover that specific project, and now the new expected and projected costs for that project. You know, I've seen many legislators down here in southeastern PA cite that this is a terrible blow, obviously, to the economic development hopes of some of the members we represent in southeastern PA, something I know many legislators are significantly engaged in. Now, from what I understand, the project is just on pause, but obviously things don't look too great given the circumstances. A lot of uncertainty leads to obviously a lot of concern for our members. Now, I don't want to get into the weeds on all this, but I did want to note that we're tracking at PRLA multiple rail improvement projects throughout the state. We've been keeping a close eye on these projects since the funding was passed at the federal level. King of Prussia is just one of those projects. Also, Reading, the expansion through the Reading area, the Amtrak extension and the passenger rail service that's being considered in northeastern Pennsylvania, specifically close to Scranton. Please just, if this is something you're interested in, please consider contacting us so we can get a better idea and a better temperature check as to where our operators and members that we represent stand on these conversations. And of course, feel free to contact us if you have any thoughts on positions or potential engagement that the association ought to consider moving forward. Otherwise, we'll continue to just keep a close eye on it, keep our members updated in our daily update if you don't subscribe there, and also on these webinars and other conversations. So like Lauren mentioned, we recently had some positive meetings with both House tourism chairs for the House Tourism Committee. We had a very positive meeting with Representative Oberlander, who is the next minority chair for the House Committee on Tourism, Economic and Recreational Development. And we've also had, we've crossed paths with Chair Daley, who is now majority chair of that committee multiple times the last couple of weeks. and Harrisburg. Both are very aware of PRLA's top priorities. They're aware of where we stand on certain issues, and have both been solid champions for the industry. And we're looking forward to working with each of them in these new roles in the 2023-24 session. So like we did discuss earlier, Governor Shapiro, again, proposed flat funding as it relates to the PA Tourism Office. That said, we've seen some modest increases elsewhere as it relates to tourism, like we noted when it comes to the promotion fund, sports marketing. And again, this is just a proposal. We'll see how conversations actually progress the next couple of months. PRLA, specifically our president and CEO, Joe Massaro, recently had a very positive meeting with DCED Secretary Rick Seeger, where we reemphasized the need for increased tourism funding. The reality has always been that it was unlikely to happen this year, given that this is Governor Shapiro's first term and it's his first budget proposal. But we left that meeting, I know, feeling very optimistic, and we appreciate the Secretary's time and efforts and willingness to engage the association on some of these conversations. PRLA will continue to build on the momentum of increased tourism funding and do anything we can to chip away at increased funding in any direction that we're able to accomplish that. There have been some incremental increases suggested that we'll continue to support, such as the money that's being authorized as it relates to the Tourism Promotion Fund. There's a lot of money being allocated for workforce development, and I want to make sure that gets mentioned because that's also a goal of PRLA and the association. While we're still unpacking some of the specifics, it's important to note that Governor Shapiro has included some funding suggestions as it relates to the labor crisis, and we're interested in hearing more from membership as to what sort of items they think would be most worthwhile throwing our support behind. For instance, one of the more noteworthy programs is the increase to the PA First program. Tourism improvement districts, that's another item here on the slide. Many of you might have seen Senator Devlin Robinson has circulated a co-sponsorship memo with his intentions to introduce statewide enabling legislation on TIDs. PRLA had a recent meeting with Senator Robinson along with some of our members, and it was a very positive meeting. Senator Robinson is certainly a very enthusiastic champion for this legislation, and we're looking forward to working with him. Another legislator that's been quite engaged in these conversations has been Senator Fontana, also from the western side of the state. PRLA did meet with Senator Fontana to discuss the Tourism Improvement District legislation on Monday, yesterday, March 20th. We'll continue to have conversations with legislators and stakeholders alike as we flesh out what we want that bill to look like. Lastly, here wanted to kind of note some of the efforts of our Lodging and Tourism Committee, who have prioritized anti-human trafficking training as a top priority for the association. This is not just the Lodging and Tourism Committee has had significant conversation. What we've learned is that many of the brands, many of the lodging properties we represent are already doing everything they can. They're already very committed to offering this training to their employees, to their staff. They're very committed to this cause. It's not only the right thing to do, it's also the right business thing to do, given some of the prevalence we've seen as it relates to lawsuits on this item, specifically in Pennsylvania. So PRLA has been in touch with Senator Kristen Phillips Hill about the legislation as it relates to legislation that would allow for awareness training for lodging employees. Conversations are still preliminary, but this is, again, something that we'll likely be discussing at Legislative Day and something we'll be discussing with legislators over the next couple of weeks. And so in an effort to prepare for Legislative Day, and I hope those on the call who haven't registered yet will consider doing so, I threw a link here in the chat where you can register for that event on May 2nd. And just a reminder, that's paired with our leadership forum, which will be at the Hilton Harrisburg on May 1st, the day prior. As we prepare for that event, Lauren and I will be, and the PRLA team in general, will be talking a lot about some of the priorities we'll be pushing at that event to make sure that as an industry, we're ready to go and completely updated for that conversation when it happens in May. So next slide here, I want to get into a little bit of the details as to PRLA's plan for success. We have a lot of various goals and priorities. Lauren and I just went through of those legislative priorities here at PRLA. How do we plan to achieve them all? While it's important, you never want too many priorities, since then obviously you limit your bandwidth. It's also always important not to have too few legislative goals and priorities, since sometimes you never know which way the political winds are going to blow and which issue might be able to get traction while others maybe are stalled for whatever reason. And so what we try to do at PRLA is we want to make sure we're always in a position to act when we're able to, and sometimes take advantage of those political winds when they're blowing our direction. Just last week, like I mentioned at the top of the call here, PRLA hosted our second annual advocacy boot camp at State College, Pennsylvania. It was a terrific event. More than 30 members attended, and operators from all corners of the industry joined us for those conversations. Discussion focused on how industry operators can be better advocates for themselves. So our next big opportunity comes on Legislative Day. Again, if you haven't already, we hope you'll register for that event on May 2nd. It's paired with our leadership forum on May 1st. It is very important that we get to the Capitol with as loud of a voice as possible to emphasize the concerns and priorities of the industry. I can't tell you guys enough how often Lauren and I and Joe get the question, well, how many members do you have? How many operators do you represent? It's important that we show up in force so that they truly see the political muscle that we have. On April 20th, PRLA will be hosting a webinar to discuss specifically strategy for Legislative Day. I hope you'll consider joining us for that conversation, especially if you plan on joining us on May 2nd for Legislative Day. We want to make sure you all are completely comfortable and prepared for the conversations ahead of us. Additionally, PRLA is planning and organizing legislator roundtables all throughout the state. Our first roundtable of the year, very excited to report, is actually coming up on March 30th in Erie, Pennsylvania. It's at the end of this month. Next month, the government affairs team will be at Kalahari in the Poconos for our Northeast roundtable. And we're also organizing various legislative dinners throughout the state. Up next in early April, we're having a meeting with the PA House Southeast delegation. We're also arranging a legislative dinner with members of the House Tourism Committee. All of these are continued opportunities to keep legislators in the loop on the challenges impacting all of you and those challenges that are faced by the industry. And then lastly, later this summer, I just wanted to mention, and maybe sometime pre-fall, we'll be announcing our District Office Day Blitz initiative. This is a newer initiative that we've been exploring this year. Please stay tuned for more details on how we'll be able to help operators in all sections of the state connect with their legislators, but instead of at the Capitol, this will be at their district offices. Typically, those of you who meet with your legislators know you're given a little more time normally when you schedule a district office meeting. It's a little more of an intimate conversation, definitely between a constituent and a legislator. And sometimes there's some progress made at those conversations that might not necessarily happen at the Capitol with how much is going on. So really excited for all that we have going on in 2023. Lauren and I always say, and we probably sound like broken records at this point, but advocacy is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Some of these things take time, but I feel very confident that we're building momentum along the way, and really excited for Legislative Day. Lauren, with that, I'll turn it over to you to kind of wrap up the program. And of course, we're always happy to help answer any questions or address any concerns.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. I wanted to note one more event we've got going on that we don't have a slide for, but we do. I will drop a link in the chat for an invitation. We are hosting, for those of you who are in the Pittsburgh, Allegheny County area, we are hosting, in conjunction with Visit Pittsburgh, we are hosting a candidates forum for Allegheny County Executive. That is going to be held on April 13th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. at the Omni William Penn. We've got candidates already confirmed to be attending, and it's open to the entire hospitality industry. And we hope to have a great turnout for the event and learn more about each of the candidates and their platforms. And finally, just a note about scholarship applications, which are due by April 1st. The PRLA Education Foundation awards multiple $2,000 scholarships to students who are pursuing their post-secondary education in culinary arts and hospitality management. So we ask that you please pass that information along to anyone you know who may be interested. And I think that about wraps it up for today. I think we threw a lot of information at you. Thank you so much for attending. We are happy to answer any questions you might have. And if you think of some later, please feel free to reach out to either myself or to Zach, and we're happy to help you out. But if there aren't any questions at the moment, just thanks very much for attending.
Yeah, thank you very much for everybody for joining us. I'm not seeing any questions, Lauren. Just a reminder, we did put a link in the chat for the PRLA Legislative Day event. I see Lauren added a chat as well for the event that they're having over in Allegheny County. And through my email in the chat, you guys always know how to reach Lauren and I. Feel free to reach out to us if we could be helpful. And also very interested if any of you guys have any feedback on some of those items that we're kind of navigating right now as it relates to, say, infrastructure and the rail projects and other transportation projects. All feedback is always helpful as we decide kind of which direction to go on certain things. Thank you for the comments. Susan, nice to see you. Thank you, Dr. Ross. I see the thank you guys. Well, thank you, everyone. Really appreciate you joining us today. This will be recorded, I believe, and ultimately sent out to all attendees as well as in the daily update. So thank you for joining us.